and welcome back to our next presentation titled The ABCs of Medical Device Software Compliance under EU Regulations 2017-745 and 2017-746. And before I pass things along to our featured presenter, April Komplin, I would like to just provide you with a brief background about Celegence as a whole. Now, we were formed in 2017 with the intent on improving compliance and efficiency for the life sciences industry while reducing costs at the same time. Now, our offices are located in Chicago, where our headquarters is, as well as London and Bangalore, India, with our office in India being our primary delivery center for most of our operational work. Now, we offer a variety of niche regulatory affairs services, including MDR and IVDR gap analysis, CER support, ECTD publishing, RIMS data management systems, and a wide range of others as well. I would also like to mention that we are in the process of developing an MDR technology to improve the turnaround times and oversight of your CER work and PER work as well. Now, I would encourage you to explore our website, celegence.com, for a full list and description of all of our services and capabilities, and feel free to email me with any questions. Now I'd like to pass things off to April. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, Dylan, for that introduction. As Dylan mentioned, my name is April Komplin. I'm a quality and regulatory affairs consultant for Celegence. My background is that I've been in medical device since 2011. I've supported both medical devices and IVDs, and I've supported both software in a medical device and software as a medical device. Prior to starting my medical device career in 2011, I worked in a hospital laboratory, as I do hold a master's degree in clinical microbiology. Again, thanks for joining, and we will now start my presentation entitled The ABCs of Medical Device Software Compliance under EU Regulations 2017-745 and 2017-746. Let's start first with our agenda for today. Of course, this is meant to be an introductory course, hence the name, the ABCs, where various principles are introduced. This presentation will not cover the MDR, IVDR, or IEC 62304 in their entirety. Of course, we could have days-long presentation on each one of these topics. Medical device software requirements are very expansive and cannot, of course, be covered in this 40-minute presentation. So our agenda today is first, the application of implementing rules and classification rules under both the MDR and IVDR as they relate to software. Secondly, where we'll spend most of our time is the application of a very important standard for medical device manufacturers, IEC 62304-2006, plus the First Amendment released in 2015. This standard is entitled Medical Device Software, Software Lifecycle Processes. And as you see the note at the bottom, IEC 62304 will be used throughout this presentation as shorthand for the full title of the standard, which is IEC 62304-2006, plus the 2015 amendment entitled Medical Device Software, Software Lifecycle Processes. Next, we'll move into software testing, a short overview of validation and verification requirements as they relate to the MDR and IVDR. And last, we will finish up with some software technical file documentation requirements. So I want to start with the documents cited throughout this presentation. Although there are many guidance documents and standards related to software, this presentation was constructed with the use of the listed regulations, guidance documents, and standards. While this presentation concentrates on the requirements for EU clearance of medical device software, I've incorporated information from the FDA guidance documents as well, especially those for software validation, as they provide a little bit more how-to in comparison to the 62304 standard. So medical device software, oftentimes termed as MDSW. So medical device software is defined as software that is intended to be used alone or in combination for a purpose as specified in the definition of a medical device in the MDR or IVDR, regardless of whether the software is independent or driving or influencing the use of a device. So let's talk about two different options for placing your software on the market, which of course would be relevant to its functionality. First, we have software as a medical device, oftentimes known as SaMD. SaMD is a medical device in its own right. It must have a medical purpose on its own. It acts independently from medical device hardware. And secondly, we have software in a medical device, also known as SIMD. So SIMD is software incorporated into hardware that does not function on its own for a medical purpose or to achieve the device's intended use. It is an integral component of a device. It is also termed embedded software. It drives the use of typically a hardware medical device. And again, it does not perform a medical purpose on its own. The term standalone software used in the MDD is no longer used in the MDR. Let's just go into a few high-level examples of medical device software. So some examples here include cardiac monitoring software, IVD results interpretation software, medical imaging software, therapy or treatment planning software, such as those for drugs or radiotherapies. And then I have listed here a couple examples of non-medical device software. So that includes fitness trackers, software that is purely administrative and for record keeping, insurance, billing, or admission software, laboratory information systems, or your LIS, which wouldn't include specialty models that may be developed that are unknown at this time, and software that does not meet the definition of a medical device or is not an accessory to a medical device. Software may be qualified as medical device software regardless of its operating location. For example, in the cloud, directly on a computer, on a mobile phone, or of course, as we recently discussed, incorporated into a device as a SIMD. So there are two very important assessment questions for any software medical device manufacturer to start with. The first would be, does the device meet the definition of a medical device? So you want to be sure to consult the definitions found in both the MDR and the IVDR. Once you've moved past that question and answered yes to that question, ask yourself, is the device regulated under the MDR or the IVDR? And of course, this is incorporated into its intended use and its functionalities. Here's an infographic from the EU Commission. I really like this on their website, so I'm sharing it here. This is how we can understand whether our software as a medical device should be regulated under the IVDR or the MDR. So it first starts with ensuring that it is medical device software in accordance with the definition of this very important guidance document that all manufacturers should also hold a copy of. This is the guidance on qualification and classification of software in the MDR and the IVDR. So once the manufacturer understands that their software is medical device software, they can move on to question one. Question one would be, does the medical device software provide information within the scope of the IVD definition? If the answer to that is no, then your medical device software is more likely to be regulated under the MDR. If the answer to question one is yes, we could move on to question two, which asks, does the medical device software provide information based on data obtained by IVD medical devices only? If the answer to that is yes, you can go straight and understand that your medical device software is very likely regulated by the IVDR. If the answer to that question is no, we'll ask another question in number 3 here. Is the intended purpose substantially driven by IVD data sources? If that answer is no, your device is covered by the MDR. And if the answer to that question is yes, your software as a medical device or in a medical device is covered by the IVDR. Here's the second part of that infographic, which drives us more towards the MDR. So the first question, of course, is the product a software in accordance with the definition of that guidance document just shared? And that's a very simple definition where software is defined as a set of instructions that processes input data and creates output data. If the answer to that is yes, we would ask, is the software an MDR Annex 16 device, an accessory for a medical device in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 2 of the MDR or IVDR, or software driving or influencing the use of a hardware medical device? If that answer is yes, you can skip the latter questions, and yes, your device is very likely covered by the MDR. If the answer to that question is no, you will follow on to the third, fourth, and fifth question. It also incorporates manufacturers to look at the specific definition of medical device software as provided by the MDCG guidance document, which again, MDSW is defined as software that is intended to be used alone or in combination for a purpose as specified in the definition of a medical device in the MDR or IVDR. Okay, let's move on to some key implementing rules from the IVDR. And again, this is just a summary. There are 10 implementing rules in the IVDR, which can be found in Annex 8. All are important, but the key implementing rules for software include: application of the classification rules shall be governed by the intended purpose. If the device in question is intended to be used in combination with another device, the classification rules shall apply separately to each of the devices. Software which drives a device or influences the use of the device shall fall within the same class of the device. If the software is independent of any other device, it should be classified in its own right. If several classification rules apply to the same device, the rule resulting in the higher classification shall apply. Just a question here: if you have begun your IVDR transition planning and allocated a notified body under the IVDR. Moving on to key classification rules of the IVDR. IVDR classification rules can also be found in Annex 8. You need to identify your device's intended purpose prior to applying these implementing rules and classification rules. We want manufacturers to review all 7 rules. Don't just stop at the first or second if you feel that it may apply to your device. Rule 1 for Class D devices applies if the device determines the infectious load of a life-threatening disease, for example, HIV, where monitoring is critical in the process of patient management. Rule 3 for device Class C may apply if your software is used for screening of congenital disorders in the embryo or fetus. Rule 3 for device Class C may also apply if your software is used for screening, diagnosing, or staging cancer. Rule 4 for device classification B applies if used for detection of cholesterol or glucose levels. And Rule 6 for device classification B applies if all other rules do not apply. And again, this is just a summary of some of the rules and their applicability. And just a note that there are currently only 4 notified bodies designated under the IVDR at this time. All right, so let's move on to the MDR. Key implementing rules of the MDR as they relate to software are shown here. And there's a lot of similarities with the IVDR. So this may seem like we've gone through these already. The MDR implementing rules can also be found in Annex 8, Chapter 2. Application of the classification rules shall be governed by the intended purpose of the devices. Software which drives or influences the use of a device shall fall within the same class as the device. If the software is independent of any other device, it shall be classified in its own right. So there's your CMD. If several rules, or if within the same rule, several sub-rules apply to the same device based on the device's intended purpose, the strictest rule and sub-rule resulting in the higher classification shall apply. Just a question here, have you begun your MDR transition planning and allocated a notified body under the MDR? Those who have their devices under the MDR are a little bit more lucky, as there are currently 20 notified bodies designated under the MDR. So moving into some MDR key classification rules. Again, just a summary here. MDR classification rules can be found in Annex 8, Chapter 3. Device manufacturers shall ensure they review all rules, never stop at the first or second or third if you feel it applies to your device. There's a potential for any of the 22 classification rules to apply to your device. Software is classified in its own right, CMD, or takes the classification of the device it is incorporated in. For example, software may be classified under MDR Rule 2 if incorporated in a blood or tissue storage device. Software may be classified under MDR Rule 10 if part of a therapeutic radiology device. Your software may be classified under MDR Rule 15 as Class 2B if used for contraception. Your software may be classified under Rule 22, which would be a Class 3 device, if it is an active therapeutic device that significantly determines patient management. Have you addressed whether your products may be up-classified under the MDR in comparison to the MDD? All right, so I wanted to touch on one of the key classification rules to start from the MDR. As you know now, the MDR has its own specific rule for software, whereas the MDD did not have a specific rule for software. So that rule is Rule 10 under the MDR. That rule reads, software intended to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnosis or therapeutic purposes is classified as Class 2A, except if such decisions have an impact that may cause death or an irreversible deterioration of a person's state of health, in which case it is in Class 3, or a serious deterioration of a person's state of health or a surgical intervention, in which case it is classified as Class 2B. Other parts of this rule include software intended to monitor physiological processes is classified as Class 2A, except if it is intended for monitoring of vital physiological parameters, where the nature of variations of these parameters is such that it could result in immediate danger to the patient, in which case it is classified as Class 2B. And the final part of Rule 11 is all other software is classified as Class 1. Have you documented your classification, justification, and regulatory strategy? That is, of course, a requirement of both the MDR and the IVDR. Here is just for illustrative purposes, a figure that I like to consult from the MDCG guidance document 2019-11. Keep in mind this is for illustrative purposes only, and it doesn't include Class 1 devices, but it can help software manufacturers in their classification. So on the y-axis here, we look at the state of healthcare situation or patient condition, and we scale those as critical, serious, or non-serious. And then on the x-axis here, we have the significance of information provided by the medical device software to a healthcare situation related to diagnosis or therapy. And we scale that as high, medium, or low based on those definitions, and that can help software manufacturers come to their classification decision. Okay, so with that, we're moving on from the regulations and on to application of a very important standard, IEC 62304. So IEC 62304 is divided into 9 key sections, of which the 6 of them listed here have the bulk of the information. Section 4 is the general requirements. Section 5 covers software development. Section 6 covers software maintenance. Section 7 covers risk management. Section 8 covers configuration management. And Section 9 covers problem resolution. I'm putting a star here on Section 5 because that is the most robust section, the largest section, which provides the most requirements. We could probably spend a whole day just going over Section 5 of IEC 62304. And sections 1 through 3, like many other standards, cover the scope, normative references, and terms and definitions. All right, so let's start with Section 4 here, the general requirements. So Section 4 is divided into 3 subsections, very high level, in which each of them are explained in more detail further on in the standard. So the first subsection is the quality management system. The manufacturer of medical device software shall demonstrate the ability to provide software that consistently meets customer requirements and applicable regulatory requirements. A QMS that conforms to ISO 13485, 2016 will ensure manufacturers adhere to this requirement. The second subsection on a high level is risk management, and it states, the manufacturer shall apply a risk management process complying with ISO 14971. And again, risk management goes into further detail in Section 7 of this standard. And the third subsection regards the safety software classification, and it reads, manufacturers must assign a software safety class. So we will go through that in detail. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about in Section 4 about the medical device software lifecycle. The EU harmonized standard is currently EN 62304 2006, but you can of course choose to use the IEC 62304 2006 plus the 2015 amendment, as long as you justify that as state of art in your risk management file. It is essential for medical device software manufacturers to have a copy of this standard. Ensure you also have the 2015 amendment available, as important updates were made. Items previously only applicable to software safety classes B and C are now also applicable to safety class A. This would include use of the software resolution process, retesting after changes, documenting known residual anomalies, archiving software, ensuring reliable delivery of released software, and applying the requirements early in development. Manufacturers must assign a safety class to their software device. MDR and IVDR implementation does not change the requirements of IEC 62304. Although there may be manufacturers who were previously self-certified who have not yet fully applied the standard and need to do so to their legacy devices. It's recommended to create a control document, which is typically a report against your compliance to IEC 62304 that is maintained within your quality management system. All right, so let's dive into the safety classification of your medical device software. As mentioned, there are 3 safety classes defined by IEC 62304. The default classification for all devices is C, the most stringent. Risk management is then used to lower the classification to A or B, where possible. It's important to assign the safety class early on in your development to understand the requirements you will need to follow. You will document the safety class of your device in many places, most importantly in your risk management file. Consider adding the exact classification questions from the standard in your risk assessment. So safety class A software is software that cannot contribute to a hazardous situation or does not result in unacceptable risk after consideration of risk control measures external to the software. Safety class B software is software that can contribute to a hazardous situation which results in unacceptable risk after consideration of risk control measures external to the software, and the resulting possible harm is a non-serious injury. Safety class C software is software that can contribute to a hazardous situation which results in unacceptable risk after consideration of risk control measures external to the software, and the resulting possible harm is death or serious injury. And here is the figure from the 2015 amendment of 62304, which helps walk in a simple fashion medical device manufacturers through their safety class. And as mentioned earlier, all software starts as safety class C, and then risk management measures are used, if possible, to take it down to a lower class of A or B. All right, so the IEC 62304 gap analysis. Software medical device manufacturers should complete and maintain an IEC 62304 gap analysis. And this gap assessment or gap analysis should be created against the device's safety class, as there are different requirements throughout the standard based on whether the device is safety class A, B, or C. IEC 62304, Section 4, requires a gap analysis and follow-up activities. The 2015 amendment has added this requirement for legacy devices. For example, here, Section 4.4 of the standard reads, taking the performed gap analysis into account, the manufacturer will evaluate the potential reduction in risk resulting from the generation of missing deliverables and associated activities and create a plan to perform activities and generate deliverables to close these gaps. And just a note here that Celegence has great IEC 62304 gap analysis tools as shown here. So contact us if you would like any assistance with that. All right, let's move on to Section 5, as mentioned before, the most robust section of this standard. Section 5, titled Software Development, is divided into 8 subsections. Those subsections include planning, analysis, architectural design, detailed design, implementation and verification, integration and integration testing, software system testing, and release. If you're already seeking FDA approval of the device and compliant with 21 CFR 820.30, that is great because that documentation will suffice the detailed design showed here in bullet 4. So one of the main sections of the software development section of IEC 62304 is planning. So manufacturers will need to document a formal software development plan. and ensure this plan or these plans are updated. Reference relevant procedures within this plan, for example, your software design and development procedure. Include the software development lifecycle in this plan, lifecycle model. This plan shall address the processes to be used in development, deliverables of the activities and tasks, traceability between system requirements, software requirements, tests and risk control measures, software problem resolution, your standards applied, methods and tools used, software configuration management information, your verification plan, which may be a separate plan, and also your risk management plan, which is also a separate plan, but referenced within the software development plan. No need to reiterate your formal procedures within this plan, just reference the control document. Okay, another requirement of Section 5 is to create a software development lifecycle model, which is defined as conceptual structure spanning the life of the software from definition of its requirements to its release for manufacturing. It identifies processes, tasks, and activities associated with development. It describes the sequence of and dependencies between processes and tasks. It identifies milestones, which are needed to verify completion of deliverables. There are various types of software development lifecycle models, including but not limited to waterfall, iterative, and agile. All right, so here's an example of a software development lifecycle. This can also be shown as a cyclical model. So it starts with planning, and then you define your requirements. You create a detailed software requirement specification, or SRS. You go into a design specification, and after that you move into coding, testing, installation, operation and support, maintenance, and retirement. Another requirement of Section 5 is to create a software design specification, and this is specifically required for software safety classes B and C. Section 5.4 of IEC 62304 provides only high-level requirements, also referred to as a detailed design specification. The FDA guidance on software validation provides more detail on a design specification. The design specification is where software packaging information would be located. Section 5 also requires manufacturers to document a formal software requirement specification. Mentioned previously, that would be your SRS. So you may have one or multiple depending on your softwares and their functionality and branching and all that. So an SRS is required for all safety classes. The SRS shall include functional and capability requirements, software system inputs and outputs, interfaces between the software and other systems, software-driven alarms, warnings, and operator messages, usability engineering requirements that are sensitive to human errors and training, data definition and database requirements, installation and acceptance requirements, requirements related to methods of operation and maintenance, user documentation to be developed, user maintenance requirements, regulatory requirements, and security requirements. For example, authentication, authorization, and your audit trail. This is typically a controlled document or record that is separate from your test plan. Okay, software requirements verification, also a requirement of Section 5. Each identified requirement, identified in your SRS, shall be evaluated to verify accuracy, completeness, consistency, testability, and again, completeness. Application of 62304, we're moving on to section 6 here, which is entitled Software Maintenance. Section 6 is divided into 3 subsections. The first being to establish a software maintenance plan. The second regarding problem and modification analysis, which must be continuous. Manufacturers must monitor feedback. We must be communicating with regulatory authorities. We must have a procedure for problem resolution and also for change control. And the third subsection covers modification implementation. Manufacturers must use an established process to implement modification. And then it also details regression testing, which must be performed following changes prior to release. Manufacturers must identify and perform any Clause 5 or Section 5 activities that need to be repeated as a result of this modification. Manufacturers must release changes in accordance with Clause 5 of the standard. You will find some similarities here with your voice of customer and complaint handling procedure, which are required by ISO 13485. So talking a little bit more about regression testing from section 6. Regression testing is the rerunning of software test cases that a program has previously executed correctly and comparing the current results to the previous results in order to detect unintended effects of a software change. Regression testing may be performed throughout the life cycle in response to changes, upgrades, bug fixes, and patches. It assists in ensuring functionality, reliability, or performance have not been adversely affected following your change. Sections 566, 6.3, and 9.8 provide regression testing requirements. All right, a little bit more on the software maintenance plan required by Section 6. Manufacturers must have procedures for receiving, documenting, evaluating, resolving, and tracking feedback. Criteria must be documented for whether this feedback is considered a problem. Manufacturers must use their risk management process. They must have a process for analyzing and resolving post-release problems. They must use their software configuration management process for managing any modifications. Okay, moving on to section 7 of the standard, which covers risk management. This section is divided into 4 subsections, with the first being analysis of software contributing to hazardous situations. So this must be documented within your risk management file, which of course is also a requirement of the MDR and the IVDR. You must identify hazardous situations. You must identify the sequence of events that could lead to a hazard situation as it relates to your software. The second subsection is for risk control measures. Risk control measures must be documented within the risk management file. Include your risk control measures in the software requirements. Implement risk control as a part of functionality, so that would be your engineering controls. Verification and risk control measures is the next subsection. So we must ensure verification is documented. And the final subsection is risk management of software changes. Manufacturers must analyze whether the changes interfere with the existing device and document the analysis and update the risk management file as appropriate. We'll stop here with a frequently asked question. What should be included in the risk management file? What should be included in the risk management file is your risk management plan, Your risk assessments, whether you have 1, 2, 5, or even more than that, also known as your FMEAs. Then you can move on to your benefit risk analysis, and finally your risk management report. And those items together will comprise your risk management file. Ensure the requirements of ISO 14971 are incorporated into your programs and documentation. This standard will be cited many times in your GSPR analysis, which is of course a technical file requirement for both the MDR and the IVDR. All right, so we're moving on now to Section 8 of IEC 62304, which covers configuration management. This section is subdivided into 3 subsections, the first being configuration identification. We need to establish a means to identify configuration items, and we need to identify our SOUP, so our software of unknown provenance. The second is change control. So we need to approve change requests, implement changes, verify changes, implement a means for traceability of a change. And then moving on, the final subsection is configuration status accounting. And the document says, retain retrievable records of the history of controlled configuration items. Moving on to Section 9 on problem resolution. Section 9 is subdivided into 8 subsections. So first we need to prepare problem reports. A problem report must be prepared for each problem detected. This needs to include your severity or your criticality. It needs to include what was impacted, for example, performance, safety, or security. You may have a software testing portal, especially if you use a third-party software verification tool or company. And then you can better track your software problem reports in some form of portal or software. Manufacturers need to investigate the problem and document the evaluation and investigation. We need to advise relevant parties inside or outside the organization as appropriate. We need to use change control. And as you can see, there are numerous similarities to your ISO 13485 required procedures, and also those required by 21 CFR 820. Some more sections from Section 9 is to maintain records. For example, your problem reports, including verification activities. Update your risk management file. We need to analyze problems for trends. We need to verify software problem resolution. Manufacturers need to determine whether the problem report can be closed, adverse trends have been reversed, change requests have been implemented, and any additional problems have been introduced as a result of this change. And then we also have the test documentation contents, which require results and date tested, anomalies found, the software version tested, your hardware and software test configurations, your test tool, and the identification of the tester. Going back slightly, as I mentioned, SOUP, so our software of unknown provenance, is found throughout this standard. So SOUP is a software item already developed and available, but not specifically developed for incorporation into a medical device, often termed off-the-shelf software. So some examples of SOUP include specialty printer software, hand scanner software, and libraries. SOUP shall be documented and addressed in risk management. For example, you would ask, what can the malfunction of your SOUP lead to? SOUP can potentially cause software interference and cybersecurity risks. IEC 62304 sections which cover SOUP include clause 533, 534, 71, 713, and 812. Moving on to software verification. So software verification is confirmation through provision of objective evidence that specified requirements have been met. It confirms that design outputs have met the design input requirements. It is typically conducted at particular phases. Software verification and validation planning is essential in the early stages of software development. While not required, it is very beneficial to use a third-party software validation service. This provides independence of review in validation reports and the ability to perhaps detect more anomalies. Software validation by FDA is defined as testing and subsequent objective evidence that specifications conform to user needs and intended uses, and that the particular requirements implemented through software can be consistently fulfilled. Validation is not covered by IEC 62304. It only covers software release in section 5.8. Manufacturers should validate the installation, operation, and performance of their medical device software. The IVDR General Safety and Performance Requirement 6.4 reads, the documentation shall contain evidence of the validation of the software as it is used in the finished device. Such information shall typically include the summary results of all verification, validation, and testing performed in-house and applicable in an actual user environment prior to final release. It shall also address all of the different hardware configurations and, where applicable, operating systems identified in the labeling. FDA advises that software validation should be increased in rigor as compared to hardware. Because of its complexity, the development process for software should be even more tightly controlled than for hardware in order to prevent problems that cannot easily be detected later in the development process. User site testing, for example, also known as installation qualification, is essential for your medical device software. The software validation process cannot be completed, of course, without an established SRS, so your software requirements specification. And you can find some definitions and other requirements for software validation in 21 CFR 820, cited here. Your testing can be differentiated into separate units. We have the unit level, the integration level, and then we move on to the system level. And the system level validation should address functional concerns, including performance issues, response to stress conditions, operation of security features, effectiveness of recovery procedures, usability, compatibility with other software products, behavior in each of the defined hardware configurations, and accuracy of documentation. Software validation inputs and outputs. So first, starting with the input, we want to have our software requirements specification. We want to have the software validation plan and procedure. We want to identify all of our software test cases, including the expected results. The number of test cases is dependent on the number of features, your software architecture, and the safety class. Your test cases should cover at least actions, exports, retrievals, queries, logins, for example. And manufacturers need to define and scale the type of defects. Document the physical outputs of software and ensure inspected outputs are validated. These would include your screen display data, your print data, your audio data, your digital record, and we can then move this on to the final validation report. So just pulling some references from the IVDR here. Requirements regarding performance, design, and manufacture. For devices that incorporate software or for software that are devices in themselves, the software shall be developed and manufactured in accordance with the state-of-the-art taking into account the principles of development lifecycle, risk management, including information security, verification, and validation. Software manufacturers will cite IEC 62304 numerous times in their GSPR checklist. We'll stop here with a frequently asked question, which is what IEC 62304 documentation will I submit to my notified body? And we'll get to that later on in the presentation as well. So procedures, of course, are not typically included in a technical file submission. These will be needed for the first part of your conformity assessment, your on-site MDR or IVDR audit. Do I need to write a procedure specifically for IEC 62304? No, the requirements of IEC 62304 should be blended into your other quality procedures, which includes, but is not limited to, software design and development, risk management, change control, control of nonconformities, CAPA, post-market surveillance, and vigilance reporting. IEC 62304 is program-oriented, so be ready to show your procedures during your on-site audit, as mentioned above. It's recommended to cite your reference standards and regulations at the end of your procedures. Yet another frequently asked question. What documentation is required to be maintained in accordance with IEC 62304? Just remember that there are more requirements for safety classes B and C than there are for A. Below is a list. Note that all procedures are also required by ISO 13485, the MDR, and the IVDR, and that's for the procedures listed here. So we have a software design and development procedure, our software requirements specification, the software development plan, the software maintenance plan, the software test plan, your change control procedure, your control of nonconformities procedure, your CAPA procedure, post-market surveillance procedure, vigilance reporting procedure, gap analysis and documentation of follow-up activities, and your legacy software planning. All right, with that, let's move on to some technical file documentation requirements as they relate to medical device software. So here's a list of key software technical file requirements. And of course, this isn't all encompassing, but these are the main requirements. The first is interoperability. So discussing that in your technical file, especially for those softwares in a medical device. Describe your security controls, your architecture, and then we have the performance evaluation, which is applicable to the IVDR, the clinical evaluation, which is applicable to the MDR, software validation documentation. You want to provide an overview of design, including the design stages, and of course your usability and human factors testing, if applicable, your GSPR analysis, and your risk management. So I just wanted to pull out a few examples from the regulation. So here is Annex 2 in the IVDR, paragraph 6.4, which reads, the documentation shall contain evidence of the validation of the software as it is used in the finished device. Include the summary results of all verification, validation, and testing performed in-house and in an actual user environment prior to release. Address, if applicable, hardware configurations and operating systems identified in the labeling. Just another note here, IVDR essential requirements, or now termed GSPR 16.2, also cites the requirement for software validation and verification. All right, let's move on to performance evaluation. So looking at the IVDR here. Performance evaluation is defined by the IVDR as an assessment and analysis of data to establish or verify the scientific validity, the analytical, and where applicable, the clinical performance of a device. Clinical performance is defined by the IVDR as the ability of a device to yield results that are correlated with a particular clinical condition or a physiological or pathological process or state in accordance with the target population and intended user. And finally, clinical evidence is defined by the IVDR as clinical data and performance evaluation results pertaining to a device of a sufficient amount and quality to allow a qualified assessment of whether the device is safe and achieves the intended clinical benefit when used as intended by the manufacturer. So your performance evaluation will combine many items, including this list. It will be a combination of various studies and analysis conducted. It will include any usabilities or human factors studies you performed under IEC 62366. It will include your software or your bench testing, your literature evaluation, any clinical testing or clinical investigations you conducted, and your substantial equivalent analysis as applicable. The term performance evaluation appears 120 times in the IVDR, which of course shows the regulatory emphasis. So a little bit more information on performance evaluation as it relates to the IVDR, of course. So your performance evaluation report, or your PER, is a critical element of the technical file. It is the outcome of the performance evaluation plan. All devices require a PER. The IVDR states, the performance evaluation shall follow a designed and methodologically sound procedure. Particular contents can be justified as not applicable, only as appropriate. The IVDR also reads, the clinical evidence shall support the intended use of the device. I'll refer to Article 56 of the IVDR for more information on your performance evaluation. And then refer to Part A of Annex 13 for all of the requirements of the PER. Performance evaluation, of course, is not just pre or post CE, it is continuous. So let's look at a clinical evaluation now, which relates to the MDR, the medical device regulation. So the clinical evaluation will be very comprehensive and will include at least this list of items. A combination of various studies and analyses conducted, any usability or human factors studies you conducted under IEC 62366, your software or your bench testing, literature evaluation, clinical testing, and your substantial equivalence analysis as applicable. The term clinical evaluation appears 145 times in the MDR, which of course again shows the regulatory emphasis. I like to look at the schematic from the IMDRF guidance document listed down here below, kind of incorporates some of the main components of your clinical evaluation. The first one being a valid clinical association. So you should ask, is there a valid association between your software as a medical device output and your SAMD's targeted clinical condition? Next, there's analytical validation. So manufacturers should ask, does your SAMD correctly process input data to generate accurate, reliable, and precise output data? And the third item is the clinical validation. Does use of your SAMD's accurate, reliable, and precise output data achieve your intended purpose in your target population in the context of clinical care? And then there's a lot of guidance around those items. So I recommend referring to this IMDRF guidance document cited here. So let's pop over to a frequently asked question. So a frequently asked question here would be, how does the IEC 62304 safety classification relate to the FDA level of concern? Well, they are both risk-based, they're both 3 levels, but both ask different questions to arrive at the classification. So manufacturers who are attempting global clearance should refer to both separately. What if I cannot find a notified body to support my device? We recommend that manufacturers reach out to multiple notified bodies if they haven't already. There are some that could be months out from the ability to take on new clients. How do I know if my medical device software requires notified body involvement? Be sure to, of course, review all of the regulations. And simply put, notified body involvement is required for devices higher than Class 1 in the MDR and higher than Class A of the IVDR. How does Brexit impact the ability to market my device in the UK? UK will accept CE mark until June 30th, 2023. During this transition time, manufacturers will begin to transition to UKCA, so the UK conformity assessment. What IEC 62304 documentation will I submit to my notified body? So as we discussed, IEC 62304 is very program oriented, a lot of procedures. So be ready to show them during your on-site MDR or IVDR audit. In the technical file submission, consider the following: the summary information into your dossier, which would include interoperability, security controls, reference to design, and items such as that. Also consider writing a formal 62304 report. You also may submit your test plans, your maintenance plans, and your validation reports and your software requirements specifications as required by your notified body. With that, I would like to thank everybody for joining my presentation. I hope you were able to learn a little bit from my presentation today. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or need any help with projects, feel free to reach out to Celegence.